Today is October the 27th, 2023. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Along with me is Ben Pollard, a retiree of the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. We're in Tonkawa, Oklahoma, to speak with Rick Jeans regarding his work in conservation. Rick is a 1981 graduate of OSU and has been an owner-operator in Kay County since graduating. Mm-hmm. He was inducted into the Oklahoma Conservation Hall of Fame in 2008, served a 5-year term as an Oklahoma Conservation Commission Area 2 Commissioner, mm-hmm. and has served as the president of the Oklahoma Association of Conservation Districts, and has been on the Kay County Conservation Board for many years, mm-hmm. so we'll get into that a little bit, and has no-tilled for just about as long. Mm-hmm. Today's interview will be part of Oklahoma's Conservation Heritage Oral History Project, which is a collaboration between the Oklahoma Conservation and Historical Society, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. So thank you for meeting with us today.
Thank you for coming.
Before we get into conservation, let's learn a little bit about you. Start wherever you like.
Well, I have been a farmer. I'm a third generation Kay County farmer. My wife, I met at the OSU Extension Office, I guess back in the probably late 80s, early 90s. She was the 4-H extension agent for Home Economist. Well, that was a strange thing because my mother was the same thing 20 some odd years ago prior to that, where my father met her. And it was kind of one of those things that my dad was a 4-H kid and my mother was the agent. There was an age difference, but they finally, Dawn and Mary, got married and consequently went to Oklahoma State. And I was born during the summer of '59. So consequently, my dad was still in college. And as we will talk a little bit later, one of his best friends in college was one of my mentors as far as the conservation movement was many years later. So sometimes it's a small world. But anyway, I met my wife. We were married in '91. I have one daughter, and she's married and lives in Edmond today. And went to Jacob, and we have 2 grandsons. Jace is 2.5 years old, and Jackson is 6 months old. Yeah. So we are proud grandparents, and it's been a very interesting time having grandchildren.
But I have to ask, did she meet her husband at OSU in the extension office?
No. She was very active at OSU in ag leadership was her degree. She interned for the governor when Mary Fallon was governor. She worked down there one semester, and then she decided to go to work at Oklahoma Christian College there at Edmond, and she's in charge of something at the housing for the kids and the housing, the dorms and stuff. But she met her husband at a church function at a volleyball thing. I guess they were doing some kind of stuff and something clicked. And they always told you're supposed to meet your kids, your spouse at church. Well, they did, so to speak. So it's been a real good thing. And they, like I said, they blessed us with 2 grandsons right now.
Okay, so let's go back to your high school days. Okay. Were you in 4-H or FFA?
I was in 4-H and I was in FFA with my mother's background in extension. I was very involved in 4-H. My Kay County at the time was probably one of the premier counties for judging teams. James Thomas was our coach, and it was kind of one of them deals that you worked your way, you learned the process of livestock judging. You made the B team. Well, the A team was going to win state, so you would be moved up to the A team the next year. So I was part of the judging team our junior year in high school. We were state champion livestock judging team. Went to nationals, placed 4th in nationals, and did extremely well. And I had a good day that day. The day we won the state championship was the day Oklahoma State defeated OU with Terry Miller, the running back, and Terry just got put in the Hall of Fame. Anyway, it was kind of like it was because after we'd been declared the winner, all the fire trucks were running up and down the road with sirens on. Everybody was honking their horn outside and everything. It's like those of us in Stillwater, we don't win all those Bedlam games very often. So we were having a good time. But I always remember that the day we were the state champions, we won that. Then the next year, we became dairy judges. So our coach made us into dairy judges. We were state champions in dairy judging, went to Madison, Wisconsin to judge dairy the following year. We just weren't near as good at dairy judging as we were livestock. So we didn't fare very well, but it was a great experience for us. And it was kind of one of those things that I was heavily involved in 4-H, and I guess also was the state champion tractor driver that year too at Roundup. And got to go to nationals in Omaha, Nebraska. And it was like, that was right during football season. And I played football. So it was one of those deals that my dad had, we'll try to get you home. We'll try to get you home. Well, I think I flew up there with the rest of the crew. They had like automotive and several other event people there. And consequently, I went up and drove that morning. I guess it was Thursday. It had been Thursday night. My dad called and said, I don't think we're going to be able to get you home. And I was heartbroken because it was my senior year of football and everything. Well, my grandfather stepped to the plate. He hired a guy with a small little airplane, drove it. That guy and my grandpa and grandma went with him. They drove all the way to Omaha. My aunt came from Iowa to pick me up at Omaha to drive me to the airport. And I got in an airplane. They landed in Ponca City. I don't know what time it was. It was daylight. My folks picked me up there. They had some food. We drove to Chilocco. That's who we played that night. We played at Chilocco. We kicked their butt real easy. But it was the idea that one of our kickers got hurt that night, and I was the second string kicker. I played on the rest of the game, but it was the idea that I got to kick too. And I just thought that was pretty cool that night. So anyway, I was involved in plus FFA. I was state farmer in FFA. I was president of our local chapter 2 years in a row. And so I was heavily involved in a lot of activities in high school.
So you would have gone to Roundup on Stillwater campus, OSU campus?
Oh, yes. Numerous times.
So was that when you thought, I'm going to go here one day, or how did you figure that out?
When your mother and father both graduate from that university, it's kind of one of those things that you just presume that's where you're going. And, I bled orange from a very early age. And fact is, there was a time that my dad had some connections that every once in a while we'd get tickets to the ball games. And I remember one year he took us to a ball game that he got tickets from, I think he got it from the banker. They were 50-yard line, front row. And that was the night we played Nebraska. And I think we beat Nebraska that day. That you don't upset Nebraska very often, but it was kind of one of those things that Dad had connections once in a while. And, when you go to a ball game and get to sit that close, that was probably back in the old Lewis Field days. It wasn't boom picking at that point, but still, it was pretty special. So, yeah, like you said, the Roundup and just all the other activities. I think at that time, the state FFA convention was also in Stillwater. So I had a lot of connections in Stillwater at that point.
So you sold some blue and gold sausage.
I sold a lot of blue and gold sausage. My parents ate a lot of blue and gold sausage because, salesman was not my forte, but still we made the effort.
So in high school, what was your favorite subject?
Vocational agriculture. I mean, I was a typical farm boy. It was kind of one of those deals. The ag teacher that I had, he came when I was a sophomore, and we had a really close relationship. In fact, later in life, his wife was the district secretary in Logan County for the Logan County Conservation District. And so when Kathy was working for Logan County, I would get to visit with her and see how Mike was doing and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, it's been several years ago. I haven't seen Mike in a long time, but it's the idea that he was pretty good about promoting. And like I said, it was the idea that he encouraged me to be a state farmer applicant. We got that. And also, I guess my junior year, I was runner-up in sheep proficiency award winning. And in my senior year, I was national or state winner. And then I went to nationals and I was regional winner in that. So I got to enjoy a lot of it going. But then I worked a lot on the farm. So anytime I got a chance to go, it was like, this is a little bit of a new experience. So I enjoyed that.
So I'm assuming you grew up on a farm.
I did. My dad, after he graduated from Oklahoma State, he rented a farm here about a mile from where we live right now. And my grandfather had a farm about 8 miles east of here by Ponca City, between Ponca City and Tonkawa. And so I was very fortunate that my grandfather was close enough that I had a really good relationship with him. And I know when we started considering the no-till part of it, he thought that was stupid. He was raised in the day that you went out there after harvest and you you scratched your ground with the disc, and then you moldboard plowed it after it rained, and then you worked it to death until you planted the wheat. And it was just, that's the way he did farming all his life. Well, I was very fortunate. My dad and I, at the time, he had his ground and I had my ground, but it was the idea that when I got out of college, he had a car dealership that he had invested in. So he had a lot of time to spend in there. And so it was kind of like if I came home from school, that gave me the opportunity to kind of do what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And so consequently, I started looking at the no-tilling, and then I had a neighbor up the road that was an agronomist from Texas A&M, that him and I were really good friends. And we came to the point that it was like, we felt like he was doing some experimenting, so I did some experimenting. And then that was kind of the way we got into the district conservation stuff, was the experimenting of no-tilling.
So your major at OSU was
Animal science. Animal science. I don't know. I still have a cow-calf operation, but it was kind of like, I showed animals in 4-H and FFA. Plus, my father was in animal science. He knew most of the instructors. It's kind of sad. I don't know, sad, funny. A lot of the instructors my father had was the same instructors that I had at OSU. The fact is, my dad judged at OSU on a livestock judging scholarship. And Dr. Bob Todashek, who was kind of the guy in animal science down there forever, he was his livestock judging coach. Well, when I got ready to go to college, Dr. Bob was the head of the animal science. So my dad called Bob, talked one day, and he said, "Hey, would you be interested in talking to Rick? He's trying to decide if he needs to stay at NOC another year or wait." And so I went down and visited with him. He suggested I stay at NOC one more year, get my organic chemistry out of the way, and another class up for some reason. And consequently, it was the idea that, so we went 3 semesters in OC, and then I transferred to OSU, and then I went out for the livestock judging team, which at that time, Dr. Bob Kropp was the teacher or coach. And we worked on that for, I guess it was a year and a half or so. I was in the livestock judging team, and it was like there was more responsibilities at home with Dad being at the dealership most of the time. So I didn't, and plus those guys on them national or state teams, they're really good. So I enjoyed it.
So are you an only child?
No, I have a sister that lives in Edmond, that her husband Tracy, and she's younger than I am, but she has a travel agency down there, and her husband has a pest control business. One of her sons is head of the trauma department at OU Medicine. Just recently took that position, and the other son works for Chesapeake Energy. I think he's an accountant or something. So
you were the only son, so you got
the
to
only
do a
farm
lot of
son. Yes,
farm
yes.
labor.
Good and the bad part.
So how young were you when you drove your tractor for the first time?
Well, I think if I remember the story, I was 9 years old, and I don't know what Dad and them were doing, but it was H International that had no fender. It had just fenders, and I mean, compared to the safety purposes, we didn't think of that in those days. But over where my folks were living, the wind was blowing terribly bad, and so we needed to do some stripping of the soil so it wouldn't blow. So I don't know how long. It was probably 8-10 foot little spring tooth that he hooked on behind that thing, and didn't make any difference where you went, just as long as you were trying to do it. But supposedly the story was Mom sat there at the corner of the field and just watched me driving up and down the road, just the rows, trying to get the wind from blowing the soil. But that's the first time I remember on the tractor. I know one Sunday, and I think I was 9 at this too. One Sunday we were harvesting wheat, and the hired man must have quit Saturday night. And my dad asked me that next morning. He said, "Do you think you can run that combine?" I said, "Well, I think I can." And his comment was, he said, we had 2 combines. He said, "Which one you want to drive?" He had a 90 Massey and he had a 92 Massey. And I said, "Well, the 92 doesn't get hot. I'd rather drive it because the 90 got hot all the time." So I remember cutting wheat over by Ponca City when I was 9. So I learned quickly. It's one of them things. You've been around it most all your life, so it's, it wasn't a big shock. But.
And I'm assuming the cab was not air conditioned?
No, we didn't have to worry about the heater or anything that day. We didn't have those things. In fact, it was probably back after I got out of college before I saw an air conditioner, because when I was in high school, I bought a combine. And
in high school?
Yes. And well, they didn't cost as much in those days as they do today, and didn't have cabs, so that made it nice too. But it was the idea there was a retired farmer over here, and I bought that combine, and consequently, I thought I was tall cotton. It was an 18-foot header and all this nice stuff, and I've got a picture of it with my dad, my grandfather, and myself all standing there, and with the combine in the background. That's probably one of the most cherished pictures I got of the farm. Mm-hmm. It's pretty cool.
Then you would make money, would you?
In most cases, I had a little bit of wheat of my own, and my grandfather was always really good about, if you went and did something for him, as soon as you finished, he'd get his checkbook out. He'd just write you a check. He didn't ask anything about what I owe you, just wrote you a check. And the grandpas are good about that kind of stuff. And it's kind of like I've learned over the last few years, grandfathers can be pretty special to grandsons, and it's the idea that ours are too young to appreciate it, but we're hoping that we've given the boys, well, Jace has a calf every year. We haven't done anything with Jackson yet, but we give Jace a calf, and we've been selling it and putting it in an account. So hopefully by the time he gets 16 or whatever, he's going to have some money that will give him the opportunity to, either buy a car or invest in school or whatever he wants to do. So, and Jackson will get the same thing. We just haven't worked out the details yet. He hadn't been around long enough. So Christmas is not far away. We'll probably start that soon.
So when you were getting ready to graduate from OSU in '81, were you planning to come back here?
I knew I was coming back to the farm. I knew when I went to OSU I was coming back to the farm. And at the time, like I said, my dad had a dealership. But the problem was in the mid '80s, agriculture took a major blow. And my father was struggling as far as the dealership because he had partners when he got into the dealership. Well, I think it was the early '80s, the partners decided to sell out, so he decided to buy them out. And he had an arrangement with a finance company that he was working with that at the time, if somebody bought a pickup or a car, this company would finance it, but if they returned it or if it was repoed, he had to pay the note off. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when things go south like that, the vehicles aren't worth what they're on paper for. So basically in the mid '80s, he lost the car dealership, he lost all the farms and the kitchen sink. And so I learned at a very young age how to appreciate the dollar, to appreciate looking, and I'm not saying my dad did anything, on purpose, but I told my wife when we got married, I would never mortgage my home. Mm. And we've got 5 acres here where we live. It's state Oklahoma school land. We bought the 5 acres and we built a house one year, and we've never mortgaged it. Fact is, we got a patent on it. They issued patents back in the early days, and we've got a patent on it. And there's been a time or two we came awful close, because I remember one night I'd ordered a load of cattle, and Sandra Drummond was the seller, and my banker called me that afternoon and said, "No, we need the house." I said, "We're not going to give you the house." And it was about 8 or 9 o'clock. He finally called back. He said, "We'll do it without him." And so I called Sandra and said, "Send him tomorrow." So it's one of those things that, I pretty much knew I was coming back to the farm, and it worked out pretty good for a while. And then after Dad went through his deal, he went to doing some other stuff, and I kind of, the land that he didn't own at the time, some of the rented land, I started renting it. And like I said, about that time, Grandpa was thinking about retiring. So I was very blessed that, my grandfather had a really good farming operation, and we kind of slid into his farm land that he was renting. So worked out pretty good.
And about how much do you manage today?
We farm approximately around 3,000 acres of crop land, and I would guess probably 600-700 acres of grassland. And fortunately for me, many of those, and I would say, Diane and I own two places. We own this here. We own a quarter of land up the road half a mile, and we own a quarter of land at Ponca, and everything else is rented. And some of these people we have farmed, my grandfather had farmed for these people for 50, 60 years. And then I started taking it over, and, it was just, I've got a lady that lives in Texas right now. It's got 3/4 at Ponca that she always told people, well, Bill will farm it, and then Don will farm it, and then Rick will farm it. And consequently, she's still alive. I talked to her last week, and it's like, she's still alive and kicking, and we get along fine. Now, the next generation may change that. You just never know. But we've got a lot of land, and we've had people that only met maybe 2 or 3 times. I lived in California, and I farmed for over 40 years. Wow. It's like telephone calls, and we've been very fortunate to have relationships with farmers or landowners that have blossomed very nicely.
So verbal contracts versus paper?
That's the funny thing. When the lady in California, she was an old lady when I rented her land, and was just happened to be at the right place, the right time, and a real estate agent called before we had cell phones, and she said, he said, I got a lady in here that wants to rent some land. You interested? I said, I'll come right in. And she owned 2 places, one right down the road and the other over the river bottom. And I went in there, and we introduced myself, and the real estate guy said he'll do you a good job. We met. She wrote a contract out. It's like, good. She went back to California. The next year she called and she said, I'd like to continue this. I said, okay. She said, I'll send you a copy. You just take the old one and initial it. Send it. That's the last contract we ever had. She passed away probably 20 some odd years ago. I didn't even know she had a son. I knew she had 2 daughters. Well, there was a big blow up, and they were from California. Well, come to find out, when I had to go give a deposition about it, the attorney said, where's your contract? I said, this is the only contract I had. Well, this is 20 some odd years ago. And I said, I've never had another contract. He said, people don't do business like that. I said, I do. And I said, and the family admitted the same. They said, we've never had one. And to this day, her daughter has never gave me a contract. So it's just been a positive thing.
A handshake or a yes?
Well, yeah. I mean, and in farm, there are still a few farmers. Now, I realize I've got some that, they got it dotted, T's crossed, and all that other stuff. But that's okay. You want to make sure you know where you're at.
So back when your grandfather was farming and you were kind of watching him, was he doing any conservation practices at that point?
Grandpa always made sure that he took care of his waterways and terraces. And in his part of the country, there was a few, but he didn't have near as many as we had over here in the Tonkawa area. So he did that kind of stuff. But as far as low till, no till, that kind of stuff, no, he didn't even think about that kind of stuff. Like I said, he had his routine, and that's what he continued doing until he passed.
Was he on the board, the conservation board?
No, neither one of my grandfather was heavily into the Farmers Union, and my dad was heavily into Farm Bureau. And I guess I just chose to stay neutral, so I was in neither one of the organizations. And so when the opportunity became to get on the local conservation board, it was like, okay, that's something I think I could do.
Well, then talk a little bit how that did come about.
Well, I'd been up in the district office, and at that time it was in Blackwell, and I talked to the district manager or district conservationist, and he said, would you be interested in doing a test plot? And I said, sure. What do you want to do? He said, I'm wanting to compare no-till, low-till, and no-till. I said, sure, we can do that. So we figured out where we were going to do it, and they helped me get some chemical around and stuff like that. So we went ahead and ran the plot for them, and had some pretty decent results. So the next year they called me and they said, would you be interested in applying for this award that we'd like for you to apply for? And it was the DuPont Soil Moisture Manager Award. Okay. And this was in '88, way before I had a girlfriend. So anyway, it was the idea that I said, sure. So I went up there and filled out the application. Well, lo and behold, I won. There was 4 finalists in the state of Oklahoma. We went down there. I think Leroy Hudson was the president at the time. And we went down there, and I think they did some interviewing and talking to us. Well, anyway, I was selected the winner for the state, which allowed me to go to the National Conservation meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah that year. And it's like, here's an old farm boy that hadn't been too many places except in 4-H. And I went out there to the national contest, and lo and behold, ran into J. Barry Harrison was there, which I don't know if J. Barry was president yet, but he was soon to be. So I met him at this meeting, and I know somebody made the comment, you need to go over to the hospitality suite at the hotel. So, okay, I didn't have anything else to do, so I went to the hospitality suite, and lo and behold, my uncle was the bartender. And then come to find out, my cousin was in there from the same area, and it was like, and then George Stunkard, a name I mentioned before, or I didn't mention his name, him and my father were really close in college. So George was involved in this organization, and it's kind of like, wow, all these people I know in the state organization. So when I got back home, the district called and said, hey, we'd like for you to come up and tell us what you did and all this other kind of stuff, which is, I do it myself nowadays. It's like, we want you to be a part of this group. We would like for you to be an associate director. So I agreed to be an associate director, and I think within a few months, maybe a year, we had a gentleman that was stepping off the board. And so they sent 2 names into the state, and the state selected me. And once again, that OALP paid off because Mason humbled to me. And I ended up being selected as the director of the K County Conservation District.
You didn't have to run.
No, mine's an appointed position, and it's always been that appointed position. Now we do, as Ben understands, there's 3 that are elected, but in my case, mine was appointed, and mine's just always been appointed. So as long as the district supports me and I haven't done something the commission's not happy with, it's never been a problem.
So what year did you? So it was 88.
90 was when I became a director.
Okay.
According to the plat book, is when I became a director, and then it was not far from that is when the consolidation came to be an issue. Bud Fountain, we had an office in Blackwell at the time, and Bud Fountain came at one of our board meetings, and he told us that the DC at the office was going to have to go to Newkirk, and there was going to be just one NRCS office. And so we had to do some scrambling right fast. Okay, who's going to pay the rent of this building? Mm-hmm. And so we were very fortunate we contacted the commission. They knew kind of what was going on, and they said, come visit with us. And we sat down, and they were very open to ideas and stuff. And I'm not saying they gave us everything we wanted, but they were very accommodating. And they agreed, okay, we'll try to keep the employees as it is in the beginning. And as soon as maybe one of them decides to go somewhere else, we won't replace them. And so then we went to the other district, and RK was open to the idea. So I guess 10 board members sat around a table and visited about some stuff. And pretty quick, we came down to we thought this was best for the county and all this other stuff. Well, then it was like, okay, we've got to go from 10 to 5. So, and then you don't want more from one than the other one. So in all fairness, K County, the Western K got 3 of the 5. So we felt very fortunate that, but anyway, I continued as a director, and that would have been 95, I think, was when we got the consolidation. And I think we were the first in the state. And you have growing pains. Like I said, we had 2 secretaries. You had one secretary that did not use the computer, and the other one that was trying to use the computer that we were trying to do more and more with. And then we had one of our equipment managers decided he wanted to go do something else. So we were getting down pretty fast with numbers. But we were very fortunate that the commission was willing to work with us. And there have been years, and Ben and I remember those years that they couldn't have worked with us because they didn't have any money. But at this time, they were able to work with us and make it work.
So the Western K was in Blackwell?
Western K was in Blackwell, and our K Conservation District was the eastern part of the county.
In Newkirk?
Newkirk was where the county seat is, yes.
So where did the...
Well, we had talked about finding a middle of the road, but at that time, they wanted it to be in the county seat.
Oh, okay.
So with the courthouse being at that time right across the street from the office, it was more convenient. And, back in those days, they didn't have the technology that we have today that you don't have to be in the same town. But at that point, they requested us to be in the county seat. Plus, NRCS was in that office already. So we just moved right in and made ourselves at home.
Were there challenges with the producers not wanting to travel out from Western K?
Not too much, because FSA was already there. The Farm Service, well, it was probably ASCS office at that time. They were already there because it was USD office. They were already in that office. So consequently, I think most of the producers realized that they had to go up there for the FSA or ASCS at the time. And so, no, we didn't have. The biggest thing was just we had relationships with some schools. And now we had the whole county. And that was a challenge at first, but we were fortunate enough to find some employees. As some of our employees left, we replaced them with some other employees, and we were able to have a district manager. And fortunately for us, we were very blessed. Hessel Purdy was a retired teacher, but he still had life, and he wanted to help, and he's an old farm boy. And Hessel was kind of our beginner of our education program in K County. And he was a really good man. And he got things started. And that was always a good thing.
So, Rick, can you explain why there were 2 conservation districts in K County in the first place and how they were formed and different?
Well, the way I understand it is there was individuals in each area that decided they wanted to start a conservation district.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they just, the eastern part of the county, they were first. And for some reason, they decided to start one at the county seat at Newkirk.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably back 40s or something like that. That's when they did these, maybe some 30s. And I've never heard the reasoning, because probably by the time I got around, most of those beginners were not available. But for the most part, I think it was just these guys over here wanted to do a certain, and there's a lot more range land in the eastern part of the county, and a lot more cropland in this part. So I imagine that had some bearing on it too.
Yeah.
But you go, I don't know, I knew where the boundary used to be because it used to be a sign, but it's just one of those things that I think we did the right thing back in those days, because we've just been able to open so many doors to schools and educate kids, and it's been a positive thing.
Then you had to work with Bud or someone before you.
But Bud Fountain was the state conservationist for NRCS at the time of the consolidation.
Yep.
He had the fun job of getting to tell districts that they weren't going to have a district conservationist any longer. So, and then the commission had to make decisions about funding the districts that were being consolidated or being changed by NRCS. Yeah. Okay.
Were there other consolidations going on that came to you guys for some pointers on how to make it go smoother?
Oh, I would guess we had a couple or two that visited with us, but we were very blessed that everybody that came to the table didn't have an agenda.
Yeah.
Because if you've got one board member out of 10 that has an agenda, well, we're never gonna, and all this other kind of stuff, and we only had 2 in this county, and I know at one time there was like 4 in one county. It's just, it's one of them give and take things. And I would assume if we had went to the commission and they'd said, no, we're not going to fund any more than 2 employees or whatever it was at the time, there may have been some pushback then. But like I said, fortunately for us, we already had a good relationship with the commission, because like I said, Mason and I had grown to be friends, and Ben and I had worked together on some stuff. And it's like, it just kind of fell into place.
Yeah.
And then later you were on the commission.
Yes, I guess it was my last year as president of the state association. I was approached by a person on behalf of the Secretary of Ag and said, would you be interested in, having your name in there? Because it was kind of hinted that the previous guy, the guy in Area 2, was going to retire. He was not a young man, and it was the idea that it almost seemed like I had to jump through these hoops. Well, what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And it's like, okay. So I think it was finally one day I did get a call from the Secretary of Ag, who at the time was Dennis Howard, and Dennis was visiting with me, and it's kind of one of those things that I don't know how it is today, but back in those days, you kind of had to have your ducks in a row. You had to have your senator. And see, my senator was a Democrat, and I was a Republican. But it was like you had to have all these things, because all it took is one thing to blow it up. So Frank Keating was the governor. Okay. I didn't know Frank Keating. Well, let's back up. When my wife and I got married, we went on a cruise. This old farm boy had never been on a boat that big, but we went on a cruise. And just so happened, Kathy Keating's family was having a reunion on that boat. And here's the new bride and all this stuff and all this positive stuff. And she got to be buddies with Kathy, at least on the boat. And it was a good relationship, because I don't even remember the lady's name that called me from the governor's office, and she said, when they ask you all these questions, and she said, do you know the Governor Keating? And I said, well, I have met him a time or two. And she said, really? And I said, yeah. And we got to talk about the boat, and I said, but he's not going to remember me. It's just one of those experiences. But fortunately for me, I did get appointed by Governor Keating, and it's just kind of one of them things. Is, like I said, I had a gentleman that was running for a state senator that was a friend of mine that I don't know. I know he had to have had some friends call, because there were some dogs, big dogs in Ponca City that had big checkbooks. And I just know that there was a lot of politics in those days, and I don't know if it's that bad today, but fortunately for me, Jack Penner, from what I was told, Jack Penner went into the Secretary of Ag's office and I want Rick Jeans to replace me. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I was told. And see, at this time, Mike Thralls was the executive director of the commission. And see, Mike farmed down at Billings. And I remember as a kid taking Milo down to their dairy and delivering Milo. And several years later, I think I was at a state meeting and Mike was there. He was working for the Secretary of Ag at the time. And so we struck up a conversation and it's kind of like, hey, I didn't know this. I didn't know you were there. And so, and then it was I think Mike was executive director when I came on the commission, if I remember right. So see, we already had an acquaintance and over those, because when I was state president, we kind of even more had a relationship. So it's kind of one of them things that, everything fell into place for me, fortunately for me. And yes, I was blessed enough to serve for 5 years. And in all fairness, I was interested in serving additional term, but we had a governor in the House that was a Democrat. And I had so many people behind the scenes. At that time, my friend that was running for state senator was state senator. And we thought we had everything pulled off. And Terry Peach was Secretary of Ag. And Terry Peach told me, he said, I think we got everything worked out, Rick. We're going to get you in. Well, the governor went a different direction. But as some things, one door closes, another opens up. And that gave me the opportunity to get more involved in national conservation districts. So it's like, I miss being on the commission, but it's the idea that we had another door open. So,
what were some of the issues during those 5 years, do you recall, from the
Well, probably one of the bigger ones was the chicken litter polluting the water coming out of Arkansas. And in fact I gave probably one of the first depositions I had ever given as a commissioner because I had used chicken litter. In fact Mike Thralls' father and I both had used chicken litter, and the Attorney General had us give a testimony. So we went to a place in Ponca and sat there, and Janet Stewart, who works for the commission now, was at that time a attorney for the Department of Ag. And Mike had already told me, he said, if you get to a point you're uncomfortable answering the question or you're not real sure, you look at Janet, because she was sitting back there. And I didn't know Janet very well at the time. And she said, you just ask for some time and you just go talk to Janet, because you don't want to get in trouble doing something you're not supposed to. And fortunately, never had any problems. In fact, the Attorney General's office had sent me an individual to talk to me before. And they said, we need you to say this, this, this. I said, that ain't true. Well, we won't go into those anymore, but it's just the idea that I'm one of those guys, you better tell the truth, because you might forget what you told them if you don't tell the truth in the first place. So anyway, but that was probably the biggest headache. You always have we're not getting enough funding over here, and, so-and-so's not doing this to me. But I think the chicken litter deal, because I don't know how many hours and hours of time that was spent on that thing. But it was the Attorney General, Drew Edmondson, wanted to get some things changed, and consequently, it was a long, drawn out situation.
Was the complaint the smell, or was it?
I think the biggest problem is producers were spreading this in places that probably shouldn't be spread. The erosion of the water came in, ran it into the rivers and creeks, and it's not good on the water, and it was polluting some. And I know our state has probably been one of the premier as far as water quality and testing waters and things like this. And that was probably a big asset to us too, because we had documentation and like I said, it wasn't all a bad thing, but you would have thought that they all could have came around a table and resolved the issue without spending all that money on attorneys and stuff like that. But maybe that was tried and didn't succeed. I don't know.
Did you use it again, or did you stop?
Oh, I still use chicken litter. Now, there are certain locations that you should, I try not to use it anywhere I've got a waterway or something right next to the farm. But yes, we don't use it as heavily as we used to. I know we were talking about that demonstration many, many years ago, when it was the idea that we've got some grant work. And we received, my wife was very instrumental in helping put some grants together, and we got some from the Kerr Foundation. We got some from the Sarah Group on a national level to do some testing for chicken litter. And this was kind of in addition to the stuff we did with the district back in the day. It gave us some opportunity to, to see if the chicken litter, and it's kind of one of them things, fertilizer prices go up, chicken litter gets more interesting. And then when fertilizer prices went up, it was a situation they had to change it to the point that chicken litter, whichever is the most economical, is usually what we use. So,
And do your neighbors complain about that?
oh my goodness, it is. If at all possible, if you're going to spread this stuff, you probably need to try to wait till you get rain. You know a rain's coming because it kind of kills the smell. Because back in the days, I remember my neighbors calling, "You're not spreading that again," because it's a horrible smell. It really is. Because in my case, as a no-tiller, I don't work it in.
Mm.
And when you don't work it in, it just lays there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I tilled it in, it probably wouldn't have been so bad. But anyway.
I can't imagine it smelling much worse than canola, the flowers, the
Canola?
yellow flowers blooming, a whole field of those.
Well, cover crops can stink to high heaven too. I remember we had a test plot up on Highway 11, one of the first years I had it. And oh my goodness, rotting turnips and radishes. I mean, you sure didn't want to drive by there on a warm day when the windows were down because it would stink. It's about as bad as chicken litter. It's horrible. So
Interesting.
And rain won't wash that away, I don't guess. Either.
no, it's kind of like it just has to take its course.
Yeah.
And when you don't graze it, it sure can stink.
Hmm.
So
Then we jumped ahead. Then we should probably go back and talk about the state organization, OECD,
okay.
before we got into the commission. So, how did you get involved with them?
Well, as we were talking, the Mason Mungle was the executive director of the commission at that time, and Mason had encouraged me if I was interested in serving on the OECD executive board. That Buddy Cranford, this was at the state meeting, and Buddy Cranford was the president-elect. Consequently, Buddy was going to be making the decisions of who filled the Area 2 position, director, which probably got bumped up to be a vice president. Usually at these meetings, sometimes we choose from the area directors to become vice presidents, and I would assume that's probably what happened. So there was Area 2 was open. So Mason had instructed me, he says, you just need to go in there in the hospitality room. Buddy will be sitting there. You just go up to Buddy and said, Mr. Cranford, my name's Rick Jeans. I'd like to be Area 2 director from and I don't remember exactly what Buddy said, but it was a few weeks or whatever later I got notified that Buddy had selected me to finish out the term of whoever wasn't in that position. And so that's how I got on the executive board and served there for, well, I guess I don't know how many years I was area director, but I was area director for a few years, and I was moved up to vice president. And then around 2001 or something like that is when I became president and we have a 2-year limit on our membership. So that's where it ended was 2003 or 4 when I stepped away as past president.
What were some of the major issues during those?
Well,
years?
we were very fortunate when I got on the executive board. One of our officers had connections for a retreat area, and it was over there in the Spavinaw region. And George Fraley had the opportunity that he had a cabin, and he had friends that had cabins, so. They would bring the executive director or the board over there, and then they'd bring usually the commissions, a few commission staff members, and we'd all get together, and we'd just visit about directions ahead and stuff like this. And at this time, we were really pushing the cost share program. We were trying to get the state cost share money started, which has really been a great success. I don't know, not sure exactly when, but we started talking about the executive director position for OECD. I know. Finding funding for that was a major situation because we felt we needed it, and then we got, and I guess previously to that, prior to that, we got looking into having a lobbyist to help us because in years past it seemed like that the directors would go in and they did a great job, but the problem is when you went home, sometimes you get a phone call and you couldn't do anything about it because you were in the fields or you were taking care of your own business. And so we did, Clem McSpadden was our first lobbyist. And Clem was, I remember going into that conversation. That was quite an event. I mean, you're sitting there, wow, this is Clem McSpadden, this is quite a deal. And but I think Jamie Longacre worked for him at one time too. That was a name for the past. But it's the idea that just, and the regular things about, keeping the districts happy and this kind of stuff. But the retreat was something that was really, really beneficial. In fact, there's other groups and organizations that I've been a part of, and I've always encouraged that if we have the opportunity, just sit down and hash out, because you go to your board meeting, it's like, okay, we all got to get home. We got work to do. And if you have time for that retreat, it just kind of lets you. And that's how we got to know one another. Mm-hmm. We got to sit down and get to visiting, and I learned more about Ben, and he learned more about me in the evenings when we were just sitting there enjoying the evening. And usually we had one or two guys that could cook or brought in food, and it was just a great experience for us. And I don't know if they still do that today or not, because I'm out of the loop. I just don't know. But that was a great thing that we started when I was on the executive board. And then, like I said, that Sage Cost Share program was a big thing too, because I've got a picture somewhere around here of all the individuals that were a part of getting that thing together. And I think Keating was the one that signed that document. So, and Clay Pope as a young man was in that picture too. So Bruce Price was also. So it was a good thing, and that was probably the main focus that I can remember off the top of my head.
And that was roughly what time period would have been the?
This would have probably been the later 90s, probably, the later 90s, and something in those neighborhoods. And we also started that leadership class that we talked about earlier. Yeah. And I tell you what, that class one was almost like the class one of OALP we were talking about, because we had so many state presidents that came out of that first class. And this was kind of Ben's baby. Ben put it together and trained us and made phone calls. And as we were talking, we went to several corners of the state, got to meet several different individuals, whether they were politicians or people that many of us had seen from afar, but really just like Hal Clark in the Panhandle. Many of us knew Hal, but we really didn't know Hal. And when we were out there for a couple of days, we took a bus ride. Hal had found us a bus from Boise City, and it was a school bus, and we got on this school bus. And we were en route to our next destination, and the school bus broke down. And it was just one of those things that Hal Clark was sitting like right across from me, and we got to visit, and it was like, what a great opportunity to learn from the guy, because Hal could tell such great stories. And in fact, when I was state president-elect, Hal came to me and he said, what can I do to help you? And I said, well, I don't know, Hal. I haven't really thought about it. I appreciate your offering. He said, would you be interested in being the NACD board member from Oklahoma? I said, that might be a really good opportunity. I said, that way I can focus more on state issues. So Hal and I agreed that he would be our NACD board member. Well, Hal's biggest problem was he was a busy man. And it always seemed like a few weeks before the national meeting, Hal would call me up and say, hey, Rick, I'm not going to be able to make it. And it's like, can you take care of that for me? And so consequently, as I was state president, I also sat in the state. I was the alternate, but it was still the idea. I ended up sitting in the meeting. And those meetings can go on and on and on. So first national meeting I went to, I believe, well, I don't remember where it was. Second one was Hawaii. I remember that one. That was a special trip we took. But anyway, I went and got to know a lot of people in NACD. And see, I was probably on the commission at this time. Well, when that opportunity went away, NACD was there and they were needing leaders. And fortunately for me, I was available. And that's kind of the input that I got, or the entrance that I got into the NACD, was the fact that Hal Clark didn't go to the board meetings, which allowed me to participate.
And that may have been designed.
Well, I don't know. I'd never thought of it that way. And fact is, yesterday, Diane had a conference call, and with the South Central Regional NACD, I guess there was stuff she didn't really like. Well, Kim LaFleur, who is the national president at the present time, her and I served on the executive board together, so I have a connection there. And so Diane reached out to Kim and was talking about some stuff. And I told Diane, I said, I remember when Kim wasn't an officer before either one of us were on the executive board, and she was the executive director of the Massachusetts FFA. And we were on a communications committee together, and they interviewed her. And it was kind of like, this young lady is a talented individual. Well, now she's national president, first female national president. So she's a pretty special gal.
So you were on the communications committee.
I was on the communications committee as the big board is made up of one representative from every state and province, so there's like 50 some odd individuals in this room, and then plus their alternates. And then they put you on different committees. And I think Oklahoma was on the communications at one time. They were on the education at one time. I don't know who put you in the place you were at, but it seemed like Oklahoma was either in the communications or which was even more eventful because back later when I became an executive board member, I got to chair that committee. So I thought that was pretty cool that I had some history with that. So, and it worked out pretty good.
I'm thinking your 4-H and FFA speech practices came in handy there.
It definitely did. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how many reasons I gave in my lifetime with livestock judging and dairy, but it was the idea that all of those reasons finally paid off because it just made it a whole lot easier to stand in front of that audience or whatever. And we were pretty laid back in our committee meetings, but still it's the idea that from time to time you had to make a report as the chair, and it well prepared me. That's true.
And things that you would learn there, you would bring back to your county.
Usually you brought them back to the state, but but yes, we tried to bring them back to the county. I know it's easier to bring it back to a younger board. Sometimes the older board doesn't always like that idea, but it's kind of like we have of all the people, and I guess we're going back to the local district. Our district back in we consolidated in 95. In 2005, we built a USD office building. Mm-hmm. And my connections with OECD were very useful because districts cannot borrow money from banks to build stuff. You have to find other avenues to finance it. Well, several conservation districts in this state back in those days had a substantial amount of money in their savings account, and they were looking for ways to invest it to where they could help other conservation districts. So with my experience as state president, I contacted Dewey County Conservation District and Cimarron, which was Hal Clark, which was we talked about earlier. It was a situation to where I had connections. And so now I did go to a couple districts that said flat out no, but it's the idea that got us the money that allowed us to build our USD office building in Newkirk. And I think they'd set it up on a 20-year payout, and I think we had it paid off in 12 or 13. We got paid off quickly. But that gave us more freedom because I don't think USDA is going to come in and make any major changes in the NRCS or any USDA things right now. But if they do, we own our own building. Mm-hmm. It's paid for. Yeah, we got utilities. We had to put 2 new air conditioners in last month because of the idea that it's 20 years old now. But still, that gave us the freedom to do stuff. Plus, that income comes into the district that allows us to have more freedom as far as we've got revenue coming in. If it's dry and we didn't rent any equipment or anything like that, it might be a tough year. Doesn't work that way.
So you get rent money.
We get rent money from USDA every month. And it's because being we own it, we get FSA's rent, we get our NRCS rent too, so it's very helpful.
And the employees get along pretty well?
I'd say most of the time, FSA's on one side and NRCS is on the other side, and our districts with NRCS, for the most part, they do. Now, we have had some problems because you put a strong-willed person in one office and then a strong-willed person in the other office. And yeah, there is. They share the kitchen and they share the facilities and stuff like that. And once in a great while, we have had some minor issues, but fortunately for us, I get along really well with the office staff on both sides because those ladies in FSA do an awful lot as far as making sure your check gets in the mail, or today they electronically. But it's still the idea that it's always good to have a relationship with these individuals, and we've been very fortunate. We really have.
So in the 90s, you would have been around when the computers first came on.
Oh yeah, I remember when they first. You go into FSA and they had this great big corner just blocked off, and they called it George or Fred or something, you know. But you know, we were talking about. I never had a smartphone. In fact, when I was on the Conservation Commission, I didn't have an email. I know Kim Tweed, who's was Mike Thrall's assistant. She, you need an email. I don't need an email. You know where I live. No, you need an email. You know, how many emails do we get a day now? I mean, I get a whole bunch of them. And it was like a cell phone. I had a cell phone, but it was the idea that, you know, finally my daughter, I think before she went to school, she said, Dad, you need a smartphone. And it's kind of like, once you get one, it's like, what did I ever do without it? You know, you've got all this information at your fingertips. And I don't know what, but no, I've got 2 or 3 emails now. And, but it's like, you know, I got a board member right now that don't do emails, don't do text. You know, I can text my other board members and say, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Within an hour or so, I've got everybody's response, and I know what to do. I got to call the other guy. And it's like, but that's the way he wants it. So we'll continue to do that for the time being. But
has the board had a female on it?
Yes. In fact, our second district manager was a retired extension person. I don't know what the extension in my connection, but I've always said extension. She was a retired extension person, and she was asked to serve on our board. And she made the comment that was one of the most enjoyable boards that she'd ever been a part of. Well, when this Hessel Purdy, our district manager, decided to finally retire, Susan decided to step off the board and become our district manager. And she took, after we bought that land to build our building, we built the outdoor classroom. And she was the brains of it. She put it together. And it's the idea that it was really a great thing for several years. But the problem was when funding started getting tight again, the commission says, okay, we're just going to be able to, fund two employees. And when we had to have a secretary. So it'd be great to be able to find a secretary / district manager, but those skills are pretty difficult to find in the salary you're paying. Mm-hmm. So anyway, when Susan retired, it was kind of like, okay, it made it very difficult. And of all people that probably did more and stepped up was Diane, because she had the heart for the education is the district had. But the problem is it's like, you've got your life, you've got other activities. And for several years, she would help poster and all this other stuff. Well, now that we're grandma, it's like, you know what? I don't mind helping, but the problem is I want to be there for my daughter. So it's like, I know this last year, she still stayed up and got the posters all together, and she found a couple of volunteers that were great assets for us. But it's just, I've told the board, and Diane and I've talked about it, we have got to find a source of revenue for an education coordinator, whatever you want to call it. And I don't know if we're going to have to reach out to the tribes, or because there's probably options. I just haven't found them yet. And hopefully with some of the farming stuff slowing down a little bit, we can start exploring those. But we've been very fortunate in this county that we've got some good volunteers. But, and Diane is an associate director on our board now, but it's the idea that there's a lot of hours and stuff that she's put into, and she's met a lot of good people with these schools. I mean, she's got connections to these schools that are very, very valuable. Mm-hmm. And so we're hoping that we can find that person that we can bring on, and maybe Diane can get her a little bit, or him or her, a little bit of help because I can assure you, when my daughter calls and she needs help, Grandma's available. And that's okay.
So Rick, I'd like you to share a little bit about K County's awards program and the annual banquet that you do, because it's been one of the stronger ones in the state, and it's been very successful.
Well, I can remember as a kid growing up, they had what they called a conservation fair. And you went and you did land judging. You gave speeches. I believe the posters were there too. And this was a full day event. And because I remember going up there and giving speeches when I was a kid that my mom and dad helped us with. And it's like, seemed like the first one was the soil was like the orange rind or something like that. That's been a long time ago since I gave that speech. But yes, education has always been important to us. So it's kind of like, I remember going and you had a sloppy Joe and you had an awards assembly. Well, we kind of, over the years, it went further away from the land judging because ag teachers have changed. Mm-hmm. You've got a difficult time to get them to be involved. So we tried to go to more of a program to where we honor our producers. So and then we could we're doing this poster contest. We could also honor the kids there too. So we have an annual meeting usually in the spring every year. And bankers from around the county, in most cases, will help donate funds for our meal. And we'll find a venue. We try to rotate it around. In fact, I've got to check with Tonkawa pretty quick about getting that lined up here in the near future. But it's the idea that it gives people an opportunity to come and kind of, I guess, tell people what we've been doing. Farm Bureau has been helping us with the poster contest, so we try to keep them involved too. And we will present the kids their awards and hopefully maybe have an area or a state award winner. Mm-hmm. And we usually recognize 2 or 3 producers that have done very well. And the governor's awards usually kind of our premier award that Trey has been good about, as Mike did over the years, that gets it from the governor. And I remember back in the days we'd have 200 to 300 people show up. The last year we had it at Newkirk with COVID just coming off of it. We didn't have that big of a crowd, but it takes a little time to get things started back up, and we're hoping that we can get it going this year. But it's just been a good opportunity to kind of let people know what we're doing, because if they don't know what you're doing, they're not going to come in the office. Yeah. So anyway,
you mentioned earlier tribes.
Mm-hmm.
Anything in particular you want to say about working with?
Well, I know that our past history of K County or NRCS, we have had really good relationships with our tribes. We have several tribes in this county, and I know that some of the tribes have been a lot more active with the districts than the others. I know the Tonkawa tribe has really done very well on their casino and hub they've got out here on the edge of Tonkawa, and it's probably benefited the community. They got a movie house out there, and they don't have a movie house in Ponca anymore. And it's one of those things that it's doing well enough that they're even building one at Stillwater now. That they broke ground here. I don't know how long ago it was, but they're in the process of building a new hub down there. So that'd be I don't know if the casino part goes with it, but the hub's what they're call it. So I don't know. It's one of those things nowadays that you've got a lot of groups that are looking for educated kids, and not many people are against educating kids about conservation, the land, the soil, the water. Mm-hmm. Those are very important topics to most people you talk to. And it's like, we have really had to back off the last few years at K County because we didn't have staff. And we thought we'd got part of our problem resolved here a few years ago when Gary was the state con, and it was kind of like, hey, not Gary.
Gary O'Neill?
Yeah, Gary O'Neill. Anyway, we were at regional meeting, and Gary said, hey, I want to ask you a question. Would you guys be interested if we would fund an NRCS employee, and then the commission would help fund him, and they could use him on education? It's like, man, this is great. This is what we've been looking for. Well, that sounds really good, but finding a person that can stake terraces and do all the NRCS stuff that they need, plus has an education background that can work with little kids or whatever, that was very difficult. And we thought we had a guy that could do that. Fact is, he told us he'd take the job, and lo and behold, a few weeks later, he called and said, Rick, I can't do that because it's going to be a pay cut, and my wife's wanting to quit working at Conoco at Bartlesville. I just can't make it work. So we went to our second guy, and very talented guy, does a great job. In fact, he's working full time for NRCS now. But the problem is Clint couldn't do that. He just didn't have the skills to do that. So we've optimistically hoped that we could, whether it's through the state or NRCS. In fact, it's Jeff Philippi is our DC right now. Jeff told me he'd do the best he could try to find me some revenue. So we haven't found it yet, but we're optimistic that in the next few months we'll find it, whether it's grant money or whatever it might be, we'll find a way to get our foot in the door. And if we have to start helping supplement this out of our locally earned funds, we probably could, but you just hate to do that unless you have to. And so we're trying to make that work.
I read somewhere that K County is the #1 county for no-till. Is that?
I've always thought that. We've always had a lot of producers up here that have been very open to that kind of stuff. In fact, the gentleman that we thought was going to come work for NRCS / the commission as our education guy is on our board now. And Gerald Wines is putting a seminar together, and we're working with NRCS and the VOTEC at Tonka. And we're going to have a seminar sometime, I think it's January something. They were going to have it in November, but the government shutdown scared them off. So they moved it to January, and Gerald's got all kinds of good ideas. He's an agronomist, and we've got another young man that's recently joined our board that's got a master's in agronomy from OSU. Really sharp young man. And Brent has got some really good ideas, and we're hoping that we can put this all together, and with NRCS having all this funding that they're going to try to spend, hopefully we can put all this thing together and have a good seminar for the producers that are looking for no-till. But, it's almost like nowadays there's all these other programs. Hoop houses, I guess, the big thing now with NRCS. People building hoop houses. So it's very possible that we're going to find a whole new avenue of producers that are going to be our customers in the near future.
Rick, I think it'd be good to share, since you were one of the first no-tillers here in K County, just the whole evolution of how much resistance there was to that, and now how that has changed over your career.
Well, we, like I said, when we first started no-till, you almost have to have a new set of equipment.
Right.
Because it takes a special disc to get the seed in the ground when you're on no-till. And it takes sprayers, and it takes all this other kind of stuff that in the beginning I really didn't have. And so it was the idea that, like I said, my neighbor up the road had been experimenting with it a little bit. And with the new CSP program, I think it was the Conservation Stewardship Program then, it's something different now, still CSP. Daryl Dominic, who was a state conservationist here, and one of the best state conservationists we've ever had here in Oklahoma, Daryl had told me, he said, you need to get in the CSP program. Get your foot in the door. He kept saying, get your foot in the door. So we went and looked to see what some of their deals are, and a lot of the stuff that they were requesting, we were already doing. So it wasn't like we were going to have to start a whole bunch of programs. So as time went along, we were able to, I guess, find money to invest in a no-till drill. And then we had some others, get a sprayer. And there was a lot of producers that when the CSP program started in Oklahoma, I would say 2/3 of the farmers in K County were no-till. There was that many. But the CSP contract, if you signed up in it, you got a check at the end of the year for doing all these conservation practices. Well, as usually government does, after a period of time, people wanted to tweak the system and change it. And in many cases, first thing they did, they lowered what they were going to pay you. And then they requested you do more things. It's like, okay, that's understandable. But some of the things were like, I can't do that. And so the CSP that went so wonderful for the first few years started dwindling to the point that I think 5 years ago, there were like 3 contracts in the K County. That was it. And we had hundreds of contracts previously. Well, a lot of these producers started working their soil again. And it's like, when we had the very first signing for Oklahoma, in Oklahoma, we were down at Bob Deemer's, and Daryl and the whole group came in. We had a table. We had a big hoopla, and Bob was one of our main. He was the first guy to sign it. Everybody was a big deal. And a lot of these producers, Bob's working his soil again. And it's like Nancy Bowling was on our board, and she owns some land up in here that Bob farms. And it's like the first time I went by there and he was working that soil, it's like, what's going on? And even my buddy that's doing the no-tilling, he's even doing some no-tilling now. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I don't know. I know I've got ruts and gullies and places that I probably should have worked this last year, but we didn't because I just don't want to disturb that soil anymore. And I have to because Jimmy, we had Diane helped me put together a field day. We had a school bus from Blackwell. We brought people out to the farm. We did all this stuff. And this was back when Jimmy Inmans was just kind of a Oklahoma local guy, didn't have all the prestige and big stuff now that he does. And Jimmy came out and he spoke at my event. And we had a pretty good turnout and everything worked pretty well. But I don't know. I know that there has been a new change in the CSP program. And fortunately, they have made some changes to where I think the DC or the NRCS employees said at the last board meeting that they had a substantial number of CSP contracts that they were going to fill this year. And it doesn't really mean anything, but as I was telling him, I have been fortunate enough that every year since the CSP program has been going, I've had at least one farm in it. And I don't know how many years ago we had that signing up at Bob Deemer's, but Daryl's not been state con in a long time. So anyway, I just, and speaking of Daryl Dominic, I've got to speak about Daryl. He was the state con, I believe, when I was state president. And I remember when that position became open. This was before Daryl came. I was at the National NACD annual convention in San Diego. And I believe George Fraley was president at that time. Well, we had made a request to the NRCS chief that we sit down and visit with him at the national meeting. That don't happen nowadays. But in those days, Pearlie Reed was the chief from Arkansas. Somebody had a connection. Well, Pearlie came into a hotel room, and I don't know, George was in there, and I don't know who all was in there. And he told us that he wanted to try to work with us. Well, he had this guy from Maine, a state con at Maine, and he had the other two names, and Daryl had roots in Oklahoma. So he was our choice, and sure enough, Pearlie sent him down here. And Daryl had, and I'm not being critical of any of the other state cons, but Daryl had a heart for conservation. And his father was so involved in a lot of these watersheds and things like this that Daryl just, it was almost like, what can I do to help you as a conservation partnership? And he was serious about it. And I remember several times that we would go to D.C. and we would, it's so easy to get lost in the Capitol and places like it. Well, Daryl knew everywhere. Daryl knew the tunnels. I guess he had worked up there as a young man. He had all the connections and he knew where to get to the right places. And I have to admit, Daryl got crossways with the chief of NRCS at that time. This wasn't Pearlie, it was somebody else. And I saw the swamp of bureaucracy that day because I don't know how many we had going, but Thralls and several of us at the commission and everything. We flew to D.C. one morning and we met with the chief of NRCS, and Frank Lucas went with us. And we went in this office and we sat there for a while, and the chief came in and we talked, and Frank did most of the talking. And we talked for a while, and finally Frank made the comment. He said, well, we have wasted our time coming here today because you're not going to listen to us. And Frank says, we're leaving. And our delegation went out and walked away. And Daryl was sitting there, and he was being a good trooper. I mean, he didn't say a word. But as I got out of that room, I turned to one of Frank's assistants. And I said, Nicole, are all bureaucrats that way? And she said, pretty much. And later we had and this was at a different time, we were in D.C. And we were sitting there, and he was still the chief. This was back when Bush was president. And he was still the chief. He always I'm a farm boy from this state, and no, here's a bureaucrat. And he sat up there, and somebody raised their hand, asked him a question. As conservationists, are we going to have a seat at your table when a lot of these things for NRCS are decided? And he bluntly just said, I'll tell you what, as long as you support what I do, I'll let you have a seat at the table. And Dr. Dan Siebert was sitting right next to me. And I turned to him and I said, did he say what I thought he said? He said he sure did. And once again, the bureaucracy swamp, and I didn't realize it was there in that time, but I just hadn't seen it before. But it was just one of those things that, I don't know, we've had some really good chiefs for NRCS. Fact is, Kevin Norton, fortunately, had an interim basis for a period of time, and we had some really good people up there. But the guy, you mentioned his name to Oklahomans that were around at that time, and we just get our blood boiling. That's what it amounts to. It was a bad deal, and I hated to see our friend Darrell have to deal with that nonsense. But and we fought everything we could trying to help him, but people in power had more strength than we did that day. So anyway, that's sidetracked.
Perfectly fine. Oklahoma has played a key role in a lot of conservation things through the years. Good and bad, I guess. But you mentioned George Duckard earlier. Do you want to talk a little bit more about him while we're on names?
George was one of those guys. Like I said, I think I've always told people that George had probably seen or known me longer than anybody because he was there when my folks came back to school and I was just a little bitty squirt. And him and Phyllis were heavily involved in conservation for years and years. And fact is, when Diane was president of the auxiliary for Oklahoma, she worked with Phyllis for several years because Phyllis was president for forever. And but George was one of those guys that he was always a man of his word, and he was always trying to do what was best for conservation. I have not heard if George is still on the board. I did hear recently that his health's failing because George has got to be in the mid 80s now because Dad's been gone a couple years now. So I would guess George is close to 85. But I know somebody told me that he was starting to show his age. But like I said, George was always encouraging me to do stuff. And, if I ever needed anybody to give me advice, he was the type of guy you'd go visit with because you always knew that George was going to be able to give you the good advice you needed. And so anyway.
Did you have other mentors?
Yeah. Mike Draws was probably one of my mentors too. Mike and I had, like I said, we'd been friends before he went to work for the commission and then afterwards. And Mike had some cancer issues. And it was, and like I said, when I was commissioner, we talked a lot. And he had pancreatic cancer. And that's not a good cancer to have. And it was kind of one of those things that when he was diagnosed, he was like, okay, he was still working at the commission. And he hung in there for a while. But I guess the biggest, when I wasn't on the commission anymore, Mike was selected as the Olin Sims Award winner at the national meeting. This is an award. Olin Sims was a past president of NACD. And Olin died in a accidental, he was using a chainsaw and something got away from him. He died. And he was a young man when he died. But anyway, it's a very prestigious award for NACD. And I knew Mike was going to be winning it because his wife was there, and I knew Mike's health wasn't good. But I was sitting there in the banquet that night and just happened to be sitting next to a friend of mine that was on the executive board as a ex officio type of a guy. And they showed a video of Mike. Well, I hadn't seen Mike in a long time. I talked to him, but I hadn't seen him. And they showed his frailness on that video, and I just lost it. It was so difficult. And I know that Donna had told me, his wife, she said that she made him promise not to die while she was gone. So she knew that he wasn't good. And soon after she got back, he passed. But it was the first time I had seen Mike was a big old strong guy, kind of like I was, and worked on the farm and all this other kind of stuff. And it was the idea that, we had a lot in common. But when I saw the frailness of him that night, it was tough. But Mike was one of my mentors. And like I said, Ben's been, when I was state president, I don't know how many times I would put some thoughts on a paper or something. And Ben would take what gibberish that I put on a piece of paper and help put it into either a speech or some comments. And it was like, he had a very gift of that kind of stuff. And it was the idea that he was very helpful in help me put that kind of stuff together. Scotty Harriman was another one.
Mm-hmm.
I think you did. I did watch Scotty's the other day, and Scotty is as good a guy as you want to meet. I mean, I've known Scotty for many, many years, and besides being a conservation brother, he's one of them conservation church, Christian brothers too. Just as solid as rock, and he was a big help to me. Dan Siebert was one of those guys that you always knew if you had an issue, you'd go talk to Dan Siebert. And Dan tell you what he thought. It wasn't none of this sugarcoat stuff. I know there were several times that somebody called me up and was telling me I shouldn't and couldn't and all this other stuff. And if you went to, I know there was a couple times at the state meeting, I took Siebert outside. I said, we need to go talk. And you always knew when Dan Siebert told you that's what he thought. And you may not agreed with it, but it sure made you think about stuff. So I really appreciated Dan Siebert and his support. And it was really nice when we elected Kim Farber as our first state president as a female. Kim she's a really hard-working, classy lady, and I have a lot of respect for her. And Kevin Norton. Kevin was an Oklahoma guy that ended up in Washington, and it's too bad he couldn't have stayed up there longer, but it's just one of those things, politics. Make strange bedfellows. So anyway, and you know what? I started naming people. I'm going to get in trouble. I didn't name everybody, but it's the idea that and I've got a young man in my local board right now, Joe Coughlin. Joe's our state president right now, mm-hmm. And Joe is a very outstanding young man. Also, I was the one that encouraged him to get on our board as an associate a long time ago. And Joe's grandfather and my grandfather were really close. Hmm. They farmed down here south Tonkawa, and my grandfather was a farmer, and he was also heavily in the co-op board. Well, so was Paul Coughlin, which is Joe's grandfather. So they worked a lot together. And fact is, I remember my grandmother talking about going down to Paul's and get fresh chickens. And they'd go down there and they'd get fresh chickens and they can put them in the freezer and stuff like that. But it was kind of one of those things that Joe's younger than I am, and it's the idea that when he came on the board, we started knowing each other, and I have a lot of respect for Joe. We've been very blessed to have him on our board for years, and I don't know what Joe's future holds. He's a very talented young man as far as whether he'll go NACD or other things. I know he's got a lot of fingers in other pies, but Joe has been a great asset to our, and we've got a good board right now. It's kind of one of those things that we have some people come and go, but as I mentioned earlier, the female that was on our board, we've had several females on our board, but one of the females that became our district manager said that was the most enjoyable board that she'd ever served on, and she'd served on several schools and stuff, functions in Ponca, so that was saying quite a bit there.
What are some of the conservation issues going on in the county now, today?
Well, recently we've got this cost share money that they've been sending out for our pond cleanouts. And I don't know how many dollars we spent in this county, but we spent a ton of money that came from the state to clean out ponds a year ago when it was so dry. And that was a great idea by the legislature and governor, whoever's. They were very kind in sharing that with us. And that's helped out a lot. And probably the second biggest issue right now is we're trying to find some additional, besides our normal activity stuff, finding funding for our education person, because we've got that. I know the last board meeting we talked about the outdoor classroom needs attention. Okay, well, who's going to do it? Well, we've got 2 employees, 1 secretary, and then an equipment manager. And the equipment manager's getting to the age that he's not going to be interested in going out there and getting on his knees and doing stuff. And we've worked with some groups out of Ponca City. But the problem is we had a secretary that wasn't cooperative at the time, and that caused more issues with those people volunteering. So we're still trying to work through that process. But it's like we've got so much out there that's invested with the trails and the different plants and all. And I don't know. I've got a friend that is a basketball coach at Newkirk High School, and I told him, I said, you need to find me a science teacher. Well, this was 2 weeks ago. And what was it, Sunday? I said, "Did you find me one?" He said, "I forgot." And he said, text me in the middle of the week. Well, I forgot texting. So I don't know if he'll be at church tomorrow, or this week, but that's what we're going to have to do, is find some person with passion, whether it's a teacher or some volunteer of some sort, that we can make it work. So anyway.
Any issues with feral pigs?
We do have a few feral pigs. We're very fortunate right now. We've got a young man that, in fact, Diane worked with him years and years ago with his parents. His parents are homeschool. But anyway, he's kind of he oversees this area. We've got a few pigs in this area. I've never had any hogs that I've seen on my property, but for the most part, I'm pretty sure they're probably not far away. And you get down in Pawnee and down in that part of the world, there's a whole lot more problems down there. But we've been very fortunate up here. Hopefully we put the fires out to where if they've seen, and I know they fly call in some of these other areas up here, and they kill sometimes. So we're hoping that we can get them eradicated, because we've been very fortunate. We haven't had any, but like I mentioned, I got a place on the river, on the Chickasaw River, I've got a half a mile right next to it. It's not my land, but it's the people in California we talked about before, and I can promise you they could devastate that land and I wouldn't even know it, because I'm a half a mile from the driveway's a half mile from the river. So we're hoping that we can keep that thing pretty clean.
So let's bring it back to the farm today. What kind of conservation things are you doing on?
Well, the cover crops is probably the biggest thing we're working with right now. In fact, this last week we turned our calves, the calves that she had to put in, we turned them on the cover crop this week. We had some hay grazer that we'd planted last spring that we mowed for hay. Well, when you mow it for hay, you're lucky if you get a good stand, and as dry as it was, we got maybe a third of the Milo hay grazer came back. So it was some bare area. So made some phone calls, and I said, "I'm thinking about putting a cover crop out here. What would you recommend?" They said, "Plant some such and such barley and plant your turnips and radishes." So we hurriedly put it all together and got it in the ground, and it's maybe like that. The hay grazer's where it's there's about like that. But I guess it was still greener on the other side of the fence because she had to put them in. So they've only been there 2 or 3 days, and they were in good shape this morning. But it's typical animals. It just always looks better on the other side of the fence. So, and they have electric fences, that makes it even more difficult. But anyway, the cover crops, we're still promoting the cover crops. We're still promoting as far as the district. The quit money is going to be very astronomical this next year through the NRCS. It's one of those Build Back Better or something that the Biden administration put together. There's just an awful lot of money. Now, I don't think they can spend it all. I don't think they have the manpower to spend it all. But it's the idea that we're going to make an effort to spend as much of it as we can. And so we're going to try to, that's another reason we'd like to have that seminar this week, or I guess in November, because it would have given them the opportunity to get signed up prior to the deadline. And whether there'll be extensions or something, I don't know yet. But, we always try our best to, and like I said, we're getting a lot more producers through that door that aren't interested in conservation of farming. It's more of a, I hear there's a hoop house that I can grow vegetables or some other kind of things. And this is back when I was on the executive board of NACD. It's like they talked about this. Well, that wasn't interesting to me. Well, it's still not interesting, but it's the idea that, sometimes you got to think outside the box. And I'm getting old enough that it's harder to do that. And I really think that there's a lot of urban conservation that can be done, whether it's through water quality or things like this, that is going to benefit our next generation. So I just really think that's a positive thing.
Some hoop houses were started to do butterflies, milkweed, and things like that to do that. That's a little bit what I know.
Well, I know that when I was on NAC, there was a lot of churches in the big metropolitan areas that would put these hoop houses up and grow vegetables and have their members come in and work the vegetables, and then they would either give the produce or if what they didn't give away, they would find a home for it. And you stop and think about it. I know in listening to Scotty's deal, he was talking about the garden that he kind of so many acres and had food and a food bank, and it's kind of like that's kind of what these churches were doing, but. That's the biggest thing, some of this stuff is finding the manpower, because the workload, well, I have a guy working for me now that worked for my dad when I was in college. So he's no young guy. And I'm getting to the age that there's a lot of things I don't want to do on the farm, but John has pushed me to do more things because he's 69. So it's like, okay, somebody's got to do this, so I might as well step up. And so, farming is not always fun, and finding help is even more difficult. And, oh, yeah, I want to work, and then we're not here today. And so, and it's not just farming, it's a lot of institutions that are trying to hire people. But
So
anyway.
what's in the back of your pickup today? I'm assuming you have a pickup.
Oh, yeah, I got more than one.
Tools of the trade today.
Pretty much. Well, in our case, we keep most of the tools, what we call our service pickup. And it's an 89 Ford pickup that's got a flatbed and several toolboxes that were either given to me or we made, that we keep our tools and we keep part of our parts for the combines and stuff we might need in the field. And then it's got to the point where the price of gasoline as it's been. I've got an 05 Honda Pilot that was my wife's car for many years. Well, it got to the point that it's like, okay, do we need to trade this in? Well, we put too many miles on it. And it's like, okay, they're not going to give us anything for it, so we'll just keep it. Well, the gas mileage is really good on it. Air conditioner works. The heater works. And it's like, it don't burn oil. It's got 280,000, something like that on it. And it's the idea that it's got the little hutch in the back you can put stuff in. In fact, we got a puppet show stage in it. We're going to be using it at the church tomorrow night for the puppet show. But it's the idea that, you try to find one, because my old diesel pickup, it runs okay, great pulling the trailer, but I can just watch that gas or diesel gauge just move as I drove down the road. And you're trying to find efficient ways to doing it. It's a lot more efficient running a Pilot up to John Deere or running to town to get parts. So that's kind of what we've. I don't have a lot of tools in my old Honda, but it gets me to my tools.
Do you carry a pocket knife?
You know what? I used to. In fact, for several years I had a pair of pliers that I carried with me that we had had knife and a file and all that kind of stuff. And it got to the point that, as I got into the vehicle, it would rub the not the steering wheel, the seatbelt. And I guess I got a little lazier too. And it's like, you know what? I don't carry it like I used to. Plus, I lost a few too. Those things were expensive. And but no, I don't carry the pliers and don't carry my knife like I used. I got usually those on my dash on my pickup. As farmers got everything on the dash of their pickup. But no, I don't carry the pliers like I used to. It's kind of like to the point. Used to be able I could fix stuff, and now it's like I have no clue how to fix this thing. What was it? I traded sprayers within a few months ago. I decided it was time. Joe Coughlin and I were sitting at the South Central Regional meeting in Texas here a couple months ago now. And Joe had mentioned he had traded. I'm like, okay. So we got to visiting, and he said, well, I was getting so many hours. It was time. And I'm like, so I texted Joe a few days after I got home. I said, how many hours is that, Joe? And he said, well, I don't know. And I had a lot more hours on my sprayer than what he thought was too many. So we got to looking. Well, I've got a young lady that's 18 working for me part-time, goes to college here in NOC. She got up in it the other day just to snoop around. It looks like a astronaut cage or something. She said a spaceship's what she called it. Well, I don't think it's that fancy because I couldn't run a spaceship, but it is challenging, this new technology and stuff like that. It's almost scary. Now, my grandson, you can give him a cell phone and he'll sit there and it's like, how's he make it do this stuff? And he has no fear. But my dad's attitude was on auto steer was, all I want to do is push the button and it'll go straight. That was his, I don't want to just push buttons, all I want to do. Well, somebody had to get it set. So I'm the guy that gets it set. It's a lot easier now than it used to be, but technology's scary for an old guy. It really is.
And GPS and all of that.
Oh yes, we have all that stuff now, and it's wonderful when it's working. What was it? This older gentleman that works for me, he said, I ain't never run one of those, but he said, I'm willing to try, but he says, I'll just wing it if I can't make it work. I said, no, you're not just going to wing it. And he's tried to wing it a time or two when it didn't work, and you can sure tell because there's skips and the rows are just like this, and he's warmed up to it. But it's just the idea that we're all intimidated by that stuff. And
on your cell phone, do you have the Mesonet?
oh yes, very helpful. I've got like 3 weather apps, and you kind of look at all 3 of them. And it's like, okay, it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle, because the Mesonet's extremely helpful. We've got a Mesonet site over here about 3 or 4 miles away, so that's kind of convenient. You know what they got over there and what you got, but still, it's the idea that I got a app that tells me what the markets are. I could tell you within a minute what the markets are right now if I had my phone, but we don't need to know that right now.
So at what point did you switch from paper records to for your
I would
farm?
guess probably about the time my daughter went to school. Now, see, Diane is a lot more friendlier towards technology than what I am. She's not intimidated by it like I am. And I can do a whole lot more than I used to. But still, it's the idea that it's just overwhelming. So, I can get my tablet and I can send emails to my people and stuff like that. But I don't know. It's just one of those things that I think it was about time Amber went to college. She said, "Dad, you need a phone." And so we got a new phone.
It takes a good partner to make this type of operation work.
Well, I don't know how many times I bring it in. I hand it to my wife and I say, "Can you fix this? Tell me what's wrong." Well, just the other day, somebody called me and said, "I've been trying to call you and it goes right to voicemail." And I said, "What do you suggest?" She said, "Turn it off." I said, "Well, I already did that." So I'm hoping I haven't had anybody call me back and say they didn't get through. So hopefully we resolved it. But anyway, that's what they do on the GPS on a tractor. They say, just unplug it. Take the power away. Yeah. And sometimes it works.
Tell me about OLP and going overseas.
I was in OALP class 6. And we went to, oh my goodness, we went to England, we went to Germany, Netherlands. I believe that's the three countries we went to. And that was a wide opening experience going overseas and seeing all that stuff. Back, I guess our daughter was a little baby when we went over there, or when I went over there. And my wife's mother passed away when we were there. It was a tough time too, but it's kind of one of them things that you have ups and downs in life of what goes on. But for the most part, it's not a bad. What was it? I asked her. She made a comment the other day. She said, "What are you going to tell about this?" I was the youngest OACD president by a couple of months. But Jack Hudman was just a little older than I was. And supposedly, from what I understand, I was the youngest commissioner to finish my term. Mason was younger than I was when he came on, but he stepped away to be the executive director. Yeah. So it's like that, and $2 will buy you a cup of coffee, but it's the idea that I just, I don't know why, but I just thought. And I'll be honest, I was very blessed that my dad was around, my grandpa was around for a lot of those years, because they were able to help me take care of the farm when I was gone, because if we didn't have a son like some of these guys that were in conservation. I know when Tim Palmer was state president or national president, he had boys at home, and it makes a huge difference. Mm. And but anyway, we had some good experiences with that.
Tell them about the 2 research that we did.
We already did.
Oh,
yeah, we talked about that.
Sorry.
No, you were gone.
Well, let's talk a little bit about soil health then, from your perspective. I mean, you get your hands dirty when you do some of that, and the value of earthworms.
Yes, that's a thing today. I think that a lot of people have they just can't grasp the concept of you've got to go out there and you've got to rip your soil to get the water in the ground. And it's like, I have seen the soil simulator so many times, and even when you go to national meetings, they still show that. But when they show all these different little containers of soil, and they turn that water deal on, and that water starts running through there, and they got areas to catch it. And it's like, you see how that water soaks into that, I guess, soil health soil, and how it just runs out of that other stuff. I've got a young guy over here that neighbors me, And the other day he was out there just ripping the tar out of his soil. And it's like, I used to think that you got to go out there and rip it up so that water will get in the ground. But the problem is it doesn't. It kind of gets out there and it gets the top of the soil somewhat damp and it starts running. And if you've got all of those ingredients in your soil, like your earthworms and all the other critters, they're going to make them holes. And I can promise you that if we went out in some of my fields right now, that water that came the other day, now granted we didn't have the 5-inch they had in Ponca, but we had a couple inches here. Most of that water is down there to where it needs to be in that root system. And I don't know, it took me a long time, and I'm still learning. But the soil health thing has been I guess it was, I don't know how many years ago that I was designated as an NACD soil health champion. And it's the idea that there's just the cover crops. And in fairness, I wasn't a cover crop guy. And my wife, I don't know what class leadership she was in. She was in class 16. So that's 20 years after I was in there. Steve Abaugh, who was a state soil scientist, was in her class. And all this time that her and Diane are in this class, because there's several hours you're with these people, Rick needs to do cover crops. Rick needs to do cover crops. And so Diane comes home and says, Steve says you need to do cover crops. I'm like, yeah. Well, after a period of time, I'm like, okay, let's try it. So Diane calls Steve. Well, Steve comes up to help. He comes, and I did most of the work, but he at least came up and watched. But anyway, we got over the field and we got the cover crop seed, and he gave me the recommendations what to plant. This was back in the days where, it's kind of a hit and miss. They weren't really sure what to do and how to do it, and what was it okay to plant in your fields. You hate to plant certain crops in your field that are going to get to the point that it's going to get on your neighbors, because if you want to make a neighbor mad, go plant some ryegrass, and that ryegrass ends up in his field next year. He's not going to be very happy, and I wouldn't blame him. I wouldn't like it on mine. So you got to be very careful what you plant. So we started doing the cover crops, and that year it wasn't really good. It was dry. We didn't get along very well. But we've got a picture in my phone that's the very first picture in that phone of Steve Osbach at Blackwell, Oklahoma. It's the day of the field day, and he's got a turnip that's about this long. It's about this big around, not turnip, radish. It's about that big around, and it's about this long. And we don't even see the taproot. I think they dug it up to show it. And it's like it was just like amazing. It's like that rascal's going to open up like soil so that, and then it deteriorates, and all that area is going to be there to let the water in. And like I said, the biggest gripe I've had with the cover crops is the smell. And probably if I didn't put the radish and turnips, not to mention old people love turnips. I do not. But you would not believe how people at church knew that I had turnips, and they'll be calling and say, hey, you going to bring some turnips to church? Because there's one old man every year like, you ain't turnips? No, I don't have any this year. Well, this year, we'll see. Because with the dry weather, they didn't grow very much. But now with this moisture, depending on how cold it gets, I've got a lot of them on top of the ground, but they're not very big down in the ground. So I don't know that I have learned a lot. And there's just so many people that I know. I don't go to the meetings. I know they have deals. I'm one of those guys that I like to show my neighbors what I'm doing. Your neighbors are always watching what you're doing, whether it's planting a crop or harvesting a crop. And like I said, we've got several neighbors in this general neighborhood that still do the no-till. And there's a few that have kind of drifted off. But now they have when they're deep chiseled and plowed and stuff like that. But it's the idea that they haven't stuck to the no-till. And I've got a neighbor over here that has been very instrumental, and he goes all over the country talking. He's kind of like Jimmy Inman. They have been doing this and had great results, and they just go around and share the gospel of no-till and soil health and stuff like that. And I'm glad they are, because they're helping a lot of people. But I got other things I'd go rather do. So anyway.
Well, this may be a dumb question. Does carrots not do the same thing as?
I've never planted carrots. I don't know. It may be their seed's too expensive. I don't know. Now, turnip seed and radish seed's pretty cheap. Mm-hmm. But in this year, we put some kind of a number beardless barley is what we planted. And and this was, I reached out to one of my board members that's an agronomist, and he was the one who told me where to find the seed and everything else. And we got it hooked up pretty fast. But there's just, and some of this, they've changed some of the rules on the CSP also. You're not supposed to graze the turnips and stuff. You're just supposed to let them grow. But in my operation, cattle are very important. So, being we have the cattle in conjunction to the crops, they work really well together.
Okay, and then were you surprised when you received the 2008, got inducted into the Conservation Hall of Fame in 2008? Was that a surprise?
Well, in all fairness, it's kind of like when you've been around as long as I have, and you're a state president, and you did things, and your mom and dad just happened to be at the meeting. You kind of have a sneaking, okay, there's something going on here. But, most state presidents, after a period of time, are kind of put in that category of, okay, we got to put so-and-so in there. And I know there's some that didn't, that were past presidents, but for the most part, if you did your job and did it pretty well, they honor you. And what was it? Scotty Harriman was the one that when I became that, what was it? Scotty's gone. He's done about everything. Now, I don't know if I've done everything. There's probably a lot of other stuff I could do. My wife could tell you all the stuff I don't do. But it's the idea that, yes, it was a great honor. And I look at the names. Every year they have at the meeting, they usually have a list of all the names of the individuals and all the ones that I have mentioned here today. And Mr. Pollard knows how big of an honor it was when he received the Hall of Fame. It's a big deal. It really is. And I don't know, it's not going to make you any money, but it's the idea. It makes you feel you're appreciated.
Yeah. How do you think your grandfather would think?
Oh, I know Grandpa would have been real proud. And, it's kind of one of those things that probably back in his day as a young man, he did some things that probably his father, I really never knew my great-grandfather, so I really, I don't know much about him, but Grandpa was always very supportive of stuff, and one of them type of guys that give you the shirt off his back if he felt it would benefit you. But he also, he had his opinions, and like I said, the biggest asset I had was my dad was acceptable to it, because he could have said no, he was stick with Grandpa. But fortunately for me, my buddy down the road had some good results with it, and my dad had a lot of respect for that young man too. And so it's kind of one of them things is farmers watch their neighbors, and if it's working for them, and it's usually an opportunity to take advantage of it.
So what would you consider one or two of your highlights during this whole career in conservation? That one I'm sure is one of them, but are there others?
Oh, I guess the year that I was taken off the commission, I was selected as the OECD Director of the Year. And that was a long time ago too. But what was it I had told? When they told me they were going to send an application in for me to win that award, I told our district manager at the time, Susan Henning, I said, if I win that, I said, I'm going to donate that money to your outdoor classroom. And so sure enough, I was selected. And sure enough, if you go to Newkirk today, there's a sign out there in front of our outdoor classroom of the donors. And I think Fish and Wildlife's the number one because they gave the most money. Well, that $1,000 has got Rick, Diane, and Amber jeans on it. And it wasn't because I pulled it out of my pocket. I just never put it in my pocket. And I appreciated Susan. Susan was one of those very talented individual that could put a application very well put together, and she did it good enough that I was selected that year. And so that was a pretty big honor. And I don't know, it's almost just being able to work with all of these folks in conservation. I mean, Ben and I could go down a list of several people that were really quality people that have gone on, because when we were young men, they were the ones that were kind of running the show. And we would see them from an afar, or at least I did. And it's kind of like most of those are gone now. And now it's like I'm getting to be the old dude. And I sit here and look at the younger guys, and it's kind of like, there's some really good individuals that are on the OECD board now and executive board. And like I said, I know Joe Coughlin's talents are way beyond what I helped him with, but it's just the idea that we're very blessed in this state to have really quality people. And that was probably the best thing about being involved with the NACD. It gave me the opportunity to be involved with a lot of people outside of Oklahoma, because Earl Garber, who was one of our national presidents, he was from Louisiana. And Earl and I, when we were both on the big board, we were both alternates at the time, but we would sit in the audience, and we really got to know each other as really good friends. And his wife and we'd go out to eat and stuff like that. But Earl decided to go ahead and skip all this area executive board stuff. He went right to be an officer, and he ended up being president. And so Earl and I have known each other but like I was talking, there are just so many people. I guess I view conservation as a huge family. You got your family, and then you got your church family, and then you got your conservation family, and I've just always thought as conservation as it's just an extension of a part of getting together and working to try to solve some of the issues that benefit this state, because there's a lot of issues out there, and hopefully if we keep working together, we can solve a lot of them.
And you see enough youngsters coming up to give the next generation or two hope?
Well, I think there is. I know Diane and I were talking the other day. She's been involved with the state and federal and the national auxiliary, and it's just getting to the point that we've got a different generation of farmers. A lot of those younger guys, their wives don't come to the meetings because they either got little kids or it's a situation they've got something to do with at home. And our state auxiliary program has suffered drastically, because it used to be the farmer or the people at the conservation, their wives came because their wives didn't have a second job.
Yeah.
And now, it has been such a struggle I remember it being back in the days when we had auxiliaries, and they had busloads of women go to these meetings. And it was, I know when Diane first got involved, it's kind of like she didn't feel that it was like, well, the older women they run the show, they don't want me in there. Well, as time went along, they saw that, hey, we've got to bring some young people in to get this done, and they got her involved. And it was the idea that over the years, it's like, I don't know how many things she has tried for the auxiliary to rejuvenate it or whatever. And it's like, it's hard. And it just, I don't know if we're busier than we used to be, or if it's just the idea we don't take time for it. I don't know. But it's been very difficult to find young people for our board. At one time, maybe not during the consolidation, but awful close to the consolidation, we were the youngest board in Oklahoma. We were the youngest, as far as ages, we were the youngest. And now I think we're one of the oldest, because Gerald DeWitt is 80, and then I'm 64, and Joe's in his 50s, and Curtis has got to be close to 60. And then we've got Gerald Wines has got to be in his 60s. So what we used to have as a young board, and it's not the same guy, there's a couple of us the same, but we've got some new faces. But that's the reason, trying to find that young associate. And as I mentioned, we've got this young man that's really talented. I'm hoping we can get him involved, so when we do have somebody step down, we can slide that new member in, because associate directors are difficult because you can't really do anything. And but it keeps, Diane knows what's going on in the meetings, and she can keep me. Now that I'm chairman again, it's like, okay, did you do this? No, I didn't get that done. Need to get that done. And she's been very helpful in making sure that I get my homework done.
So going forward, what do you see in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I hope our health stays good enough that we continue farming. I'm optimistically hoping that between now and those 5 years, we find some individual that is wanting to get into farming, that would be interested in coming and working with me for a period of time and possibly work in or purchase or whatever my operation, because that's probably the biggest obstacle we have on the farm now, besides just finding regular help, is finding that next generation of an individual. Because everybody, oh, you got a grandson. 2.5-year-old grandson is not going to be ready to do something like that for another 20, 25 years. I don't know if grandpa's going to be around 25 years. And it's like, it's just trying to find that individual or her. I'm not, like I said, we hired a young lady the other day that I think can outwork a lot of the boys that I've had out here in the previous years. But finding that person for our next generation, because my son-in-law, he's a smart guy. He don't want to come back to the farm, nor should he. And my daughter's same way. She's very talented, and they've got a family and everything, and they're happy where they're at, I believe. So, just finding that next generation to take over the farm, because you stop and think, I've had three, my grandpa started a lot of this, then dad, and then I came along, and it's like, I remember when we had to go way up by Bremen to farm, and we had to go way down by Billings to farm. We still have to go a little ways, but for the most part, I can go over here about 2 miles away, and I can walk almost on every place we farm for about 3 miles, or at least kind of, not the whole quarter, but we go over here and then over here and over here. But it's just really convenient. Yeah. And it's like, it'd be a great opportunity for some person that wants to be a farmer that, we've always talked about, Diane and I, about we need to find that guy that's got 2 or 3 brothers at home that wants to farm, but there's not really going to be enough room for him, and get that individual, because you got to have heart to farm. It's just all there is to it. It's got to be in your blood. And I know that we had a young man a couple years ago that we thought might be an opportunity, but I think he realized. And he told me, he said, all this stuff that's coming down from Washington, what's going to happen if you have to get rid of your cows because of methane gas? Oh, I hadn't thought of that. It's probably not going to affect me, but in 20, 30 years, you just don't know. And then you get some of these other things they're talking about that, with the climate and all this stuff, where they're going to, you can't do this, you can't do this. And we're going to have electric tractors. And there's just a lot of things that they keep talking about. Not really sure how they're going to make it work, but I don't know. And so he told me, he said, I really don't think that's what I want to do. It's like, okay, I can appreciate that. But anyway, we're I guess hoping that our health stays good enough. And so far it has. We can continue to farm for a while, and what was it? Diane said the other day, she said, do we have to farm all this? And I said, who would you start dropping? I mean, it's like, well, we could sell some cows, but it's like our cows kind of fit the number of acres of pasture we have. So if you sell some of your cows, okay, which pastures? And some of the pastures, like my school land, I'm already paying for it, so I might as well use it. So I don't know. It's just one of those things that as I get older, things are a lot more, I guess, clearer in some areas, but in other areas are more murky. Mm-hmm. And it's just trying to figure out what might be the best avenue. And right now we're still searching for that. But as I've said, God's blessed us with good health. And fortunately for me, that's been a very positive thing.
I've covered mine. Have you covered yours?
I have.
Have you covered yours?
I think so.
Well,
you want to tell them the story of Grandpa and the fertilizer?
Good story. Yeah.
My grandfather used to tell the story. He had a gentleman that was a mayor of Ponca City, and this gentleman had a farm out there by where my grandpa's farm was. And this was back when fertilizer was not being used. And my grandpa was involved with the co-op heavily, so I guess one year Grandpa decided he was going to fertilize his farm. So he went to Clem and he said, I'm going to fertilize my farm. It's going to cost about this much. Clem said, oh, you're going to ruin that soil. I don't want you to do it. And Grandpa said, tell you what I'll do. I'll fertilize my 2/3, but I won't fertilize your 1/3. And Clem agreed that'd be fine. So they went out there and Grandpa fertilized him. And he said after the first year, Clem said, next year you're going to fertilize mine too. Because I can only imagine the difference in yield of what fertilizer would do on the ground that probably hadn't had fertilizer. And but that was the story that Grandpa used to tell. And fortunately, that particular farm is one of the farms that we own today. It's been a long time ago. Channel 9, Diane made a phone call. Channel 9 came up here 20 some odd years ago probably. Mm-hmm. And they did a deal on us at harvest time. Grandpa had his combine, I had my combine, Dad had a combine. Well, they rode with me, and we talked about it. And it's the idea that my grandpa, I think at the time, we've estimated he had farmed that place for over 50 years. And this was back, like I said, many years ago. Well, the lady that owned the land, she had no faith. She had a couple of nieces, but we just figured that when something happened to her, she's going to give it to Grandpa. Well, she did. She gave it to the nieces and nephew. So I farmed a place down here by Tonkawa that I was farming for. Well, lo and behold, when she passed away, she left the niece, and I tried to buy this one up here. Well, the tribe ended up buying it. And it's like, okay, well, they offered that one over there to me. And so we worked out the details, and Diane and I bought it. But it's like, that farm has been in the family for, many Christmas, probably 70 some odd years. There's always been a genes that's been taking care of it. And just so happens my cousin owns the one right next to it. And he lives in Alaska. Now, he's not interested in selling, he says. But it's just the idea that, what was it, Tim Palmer told me one time, when you're a young man, that farm over there has always been you always want that farm. It's got everything just exactly what you want. But he said, when you get to be our age, he said, that farm's not near as attractive as it used to be because I'm going to have to pay for it, and I don't want to have to come up with the money to pay for it. And it's just the idea that as we get older, it just seems like that we don't quite desire certain things like we used to. Young farmers, I want to farm. When I got out of college, I want to farm the whole county. Well, then you start going through bad weather and crop failures and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know if it's such a good idea or not. But fortunately, I've been fortunate with my family's support that we've made it this long, and I think we'll make it to the end and make it work.
All right, then 2 questions. So do you think OSU's education did a good foundation for where you are today, or not so much?
Yes, it did. Like I said, it was an animal science, and I learned a lot. I probably forgot most of it by now, but in animal science, I learned a whole lot about the reproduction and genetics. Although I wasn't any good in genetics and nutrition and all these things, where it makes it easier when I'm taking care of my cattle. I know what rations we need to do and what minerals I need to make sure to put in it. And that helped me. My biggest concern today is a lot of these schools. We've seen just in the last few days, we've been seeing stuff going on. Maybe not at OSU, but we've been seeing some stuff going on at some major universities from across the nation. It's like, it makes me, my wife and I have always been pro-education. In fact, our daughter, you're going to college. She did. Fortunately for her, she was very talented to get scholarships and stuff like that, and it didn't really cause that much of a burden on the farm. And our grandsons, we would love for both them to go to school, but it's like our son-in-law didn't go to school, college, full-time. He doesn't have a degree from the university, but he's extremely talented. He's extremely gifted. He's got a job probably paying more than I'd ever make working on the farm. But I'm pro-education as far as college, but I don't know. Sometimes I kind of feel like that the universities are, how much money can we get? And it's like, that bothers me sometimes. And, I don't know. It just, I would encourage this young lady that's working for us. She's going to NOC. I'm encouraging her to, get her degree out here. If she wants to go to the next level, that's fine. But, I'm still pro-education. I think it's good, especially higher education.
Okay, then last question. How do you want history to remember you?
Oh, my. I guess there's different gifts that God has blessed us all with. Talks about that in Scriptures in Corinthians. And one of my favorite Bible verses is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And it's kind of like, we were talking about all these individuals that have been a part of the conservation family that have went on. And it's like, you think about them, or, I'll think of Mike Thralls. I'll get sad a little bit. And it's like, but you know what? Think of the relationship you had with that guy and what he taught you and what you learned from him. And hopefully some of the stuff he learned from you. And it's just one of them things that, it ain't all about me, but it's the idea that I just hope that, I was able to encourage some individuals to, get involved in conservation, or whether it was a kid doing a speech that I happened to be judging, or it's a situation where a poster, I was able to encourage a kid by giving him an award by doing well on his poster. I just hope that, we always talk about, we want to leave the land better than it was before. Well, I think we all have that initiative, but I want my grandkids to be able to do well, have the opportunity. If they want to come back to the farm, they're more than welcome to. I would love for my family to get my daughter, and I've made that known by some of the Oklahoma County Conservation District board members. I'd love to see her on the conservation board down there in Oklahoma County someday, because when you've grown up around it like she has, because I can promise you, Grandma, Mama, and Daddy took Amber pretty much everywhere. Everybody knows Amber, and she went a lot of places. And even the grandsons have been at the state meeting. Jackson hadn't, but Jace has. We've shown them off at the state meeting the last couple of years. So, I appreciate what the forefathers of conservation did for me, and I'm just hoping that some of the stuff that I've done in the years that I've served that will benefit the next generation of young people that are coming up. So.
Well said. I don't think you have to worry too much, do you? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
One
Rick.
more thing.